Alright, now that I have the engine on the engine stand, it is time to crack open the vault. So let's get with the program. Well, it was my first look at it too. Let's take a look here. Wow. That's very, very clean in there. There is just no crud in there. The cylinder walls look good. This is just nice. You can still see the crosshatch pattern in some of those cylinder walls. I'm going to turn the crank a little bit and get a closer look at some of these. Okay, I don't know if you can see it down there or not, but the cylinder walls still have the crosshatch pattern from the factory when they honed the cylinder walls out. And the only thing I've found of any concern at all is a tiny bit of crud in the pickup. That's nothing. I mean, I've seen some really skanky engines in my day, and this one, you could, you know, if you had a tolerance for oil, you could probably eat off of this thing. I mean, those cylinder walls are nice. So I guess the only thing left to do is pull off the rear main bearing and see how that bearing lives. And if that bearing looks good, I'm going to just assume they're all good, because everything on this engine is like brand new. It wasn't making any noises it wasn't supposed to. And I have to pull this main cap off anyway to replace the rear seal, because I am a firm believer that you don't get this far into an engine and not take out the rear main and change the seal. I mean, it's just because, you know, if you go through all this work and you put it back together, that rear, and you don't change the rear main is gonna leak. So let's pull the rear main off and see what that looks like. Well, there's the seal. Take a look at that. You know, I've seen better, but I've seen a heck of a lot worse. Wonder what size of bearings these are. Ford Motor Company. These are the original bearing. I want to thank everybody that watches my channel. I really, really appreciate it. And I want to ask you a favor. I want you to go down there at the bottom and click that you like the video, and also click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Check, make sure you have. And one additional thing, think of somebody in your life that might enjoy watching these videos and share them with them. Let me know what you'd like to see. If there's certain parts of the project you want me to focus on, give me some feedback. Let me know. And by all means, like, subscribe, and share the channel. Thank you so very much. Okay, so this engine has, from what I can tell, about 140,000 miles on it. So since I have it apart and I'm checking these bearings, I thought, you know, I'll just throw a new set of bearings in there just to be on the safe side since everything looked pretty clean. However, when I went to go get some, it wasn't quite that easy. They didn't really have any, so I can get some that are slightly oversized. So I figured the best thing to do is get some Plastigauge and figure out just exactly what I actually need to do instead of just guessing. Because, you know, it's one thing to break down and be brought home on the back of a tow truck with your car. It's another thing to know better and still end up being brought home on a tow truck because you blew your motor and you knew better and you knew you should have checked it while you were in there. So let's check it. Now, if you haven't used Plastigauge before, it's pretty simple. Plastigauge comes in a little container like this, and it's a little tiny strip of plastic. Perhaps you can see that little piece of green plastic right there. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, I don't know. Anyway, what we do is we take off a rod cap. You put a small piece of Plastigauge right there on the crank, on the rod bearing. And you put your rod bearing back on there and you torque your bearing caps down just like you're installing the engine. And in this case, with this engine, it's 42 pounds. I'm going to work my way down to it. I'm not going to just crank them all the way down. This should go, there we go, 42 pounds. 42 pounds, okay. Now that little tiny piece of plastic I stuck in there will squish down and get wider depending on the gap. Now the wider it is, the smaller the gap. So if the gap's correct, then it'll match up as wide or wider than the gauge on the side of my paper here. So I'm kind of curious what this one's going to be. Pull this rod cap off. There we go. Now let's see how wide this little guy is. Yeah, you can see right there how it got wider. And here we go. And when you look, you can see the 15 thousandths is that white one, and the Plastigauge is considerably narrower, so that means the gap is greater than 15 thousandths. You can see that right there, 15 thousandths, and then the gap difference. So that means our gap between our bearing and our bearing race is too much. So I can actually go with a 1,000th undersized bearing, which I can get those all day long, and I'll be just fine, and it'll actually be better for the engine. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to get the bearings that are available to me, because they're even, strangely enough, the correct bearings. So I'll do the same measurement on the main bearings. So these are the rods that go down and hook to the pistons from the crank, and then the main bearings are right here. I'm going to do the same Plastigauge technique on them, and we'll see what bearings I need for those. Okay, so the bearing tolerances are not within the gap they're supposed to be. It's too wide. So I definitely need to put new bearings in. but exactly what bearings, I'm not exactly sure. Now they make different bearings that are thicker, so they make up for a tiny bit of wear, but I also have to keep in mind that these bearings are worn to some extent anyway. So how much of it is crank wear, how much of it is bearing wear, I'm not really sure. I'm probably going to go with the minimum, because this engine didn't make any noise, it didn't rattle, and I'm not racing this engine, so I'll probably go with one size, you know, 1/1000th of an inch thicker to make up for some wear, but because I think most of it is in the bearings themselves. So anyway, I'm going to stick them in there. I'll put the new bearings in, I'll plastic gauge the new bearings, and we'll make sure that we're within tolerances. So anyway, that's where we are at that. No, that's where we are with that. And so my next stop is the auto parts store to confer with the guy there and see what he thinks. And the guy I work with at the auto parts store used to rebuild motorcycles and stuff like that at his own shop. He's kind of retired from that and working at the auto parts store to fill in his day, I guess. But he's pretty knowledgeable on these engine builds, and so I'm going to consult with him and figure out what the best thing to do is, and that'll be on the next video.